This is your World War III update. Here's what's going down. Okay, so we have some new news with respect to the Iranian situation. I'm in the greenhouse today because some of you may not know, but I do live on a homestead. This channel is a spin-off of the Canadian Prepper channel. And I tell you, living off-grid is a lot of work. So just make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. To be fully prepared for the worst that may come requires a lot of sweat equity. Now, the U.S. has made a final offer to Iran. According to the White House press secretary, Carolyn Leavitt, Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, has delivered a comprehensive and fair proposal to Iran for a nuclear agreement. He claims that it's in their best interest to accept it. Now, yesterday, the International Atomic Energy Agency said that Iran was actually in violation of uranium enrichment, that they had conducted hidden nuclear activities using unreported materials at 3 sites that were under investigation. They claimed that they carried out these secret nuclear activities with material not declared to the UN nuclear watchdog at these 3 locations. So here we have the setup. Now, how timely is it that in the run-up to these extensive military preparations that Israel has been conducting for the last 48 hours, in which they are getting their bunkers prepared, getting emergency services lined up on standby for Iran's retaliatory strike to their strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. And remember those 3 immutable truths about why the whole division between Trump and Netanyahu is complete bullshit. Number 1, all Trump would have to say is that, hey, we're not coming to your aid if you decide to attack Iran. He hasn't done that yet, thereby setting the precedent that if you do that, we will come to your aid. 2, he could stop the weapon shipments. And 3, there could be less crackdown and censorship on dissenting voices within the United States who are criticizing Israel and the U.S. foreign policy towards Israel. None of those 3 things are changing, which indicates that that whole phony baloney division that you're seeing between Trump and Netanyahu is pure theatrics for the purpose of plausible deniability to exculpate the United States from what the Israelis are about to do, but leave the option open for them to come in and help the Israelis, thereby starting what will likely be one of the biggest wars of our generation. Okay? Now, they claim that the Iranians are amassing nuclear material. The report by the IAEA says that as of May 17th, Iran has amassed 408 kilograms of uranium enriched up to 60%. Now, experts claim that what this translates into is that within a very short period of time, we're talking about a matter of days, Iran could potentially have the fissile material for 10 nuclear weapons, okay? Now, Iran has responded to this report saying that Europe has violated its commitments because, remember, the JCPOA is basically now defunct. So it won't keep its own commitments to the agreement. And they've also threatened that if snapback sanctions are reimposed on Iran, that there's going to be harsh consequences and Iran will fully back away from these negotiations. And that essentially is the threat that we are seeing. Now, there's also a NATO plane that has been flying very close to the Iranian coastline in the Persian Gulf, a NATO E-3A Sentry AWACS aircraft operating under the call sign NAT-008 is currently conducting surveillance operations near Iran. They've been doing that actually for quite a while, but of course now Iran is on a very high state of alert in light of a lot of the threats that are coming out of Israeli media publications as of recent. So that's what's going on with respect to that story today. There is a notice to airmen's ballistic missile firing test coming out of Iran on June 1st and 2nd, and I believe there's another one for the 4th. So, you know, that could be a form of posturing. We're not too sure. And all of this bluster about a potential attack by the Israelis could just be that, to try to force Iran's hand in accepting a deal. But AIPAC is saying that they want nothing short of a complete dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program, okay? So AIPAC is calling for the dismantlement of all of Iran's nuclear facilities. Now, in terms of what's going on with the UK and the Ukraine and Russia, today, at the time of making this video, there is a massive attack underway. 400 drones, I believe, from the Russian side to the Ukrainian side. A lot of stuff has happened, more than I care to even point out in a video like this, but just know that things are escalating rapidly. Yesterday, when Senator Blumenthal and Lindsey Graham went to Kiev and committed to putting forth a bill that is going to propose 500% tariffs on any country that does business with Russia's shadow fleet, of course, this would cripple China. I mean, think about what that would really mean, right? We're talking about 150% tariffs. If you're talking about 500% tariffs, that's basically game over for any form of trade. Nobody's going to trade. In fact, American companies might even be profitable at 500%. So that would completely nuke China-US relations. And this coming on the heels of some fairly provocative statements by Pete Hegseth towards the Chinese last night. Well, it's not looking good, okay? Trump said that he's going to familiarize himself with the bill, which could be passed by Congress. And I'm not sure how the process works in the United States, whether he can veto it or, whether it's going to go. I think a lot of these sanctions are brokered at the congressional level and are outside the scope of the POTUS, but, don't quote me on that. According to the UK, they are now wanting a new nuclear platform. We've been actually talking about this for over a year. They've been preparing facilities to receive U.S. nuclear weapons for some time. The Defense Secretary, John Healey, and Admiral Tony Radakin are looking at acquiring U.S.-made jets like the F-35A, which can launch the new B-61 gravity bombs with yields that range from 0.3 to 340 kilotons, which is essentially no longer a tactical nuclear weapon. I mean, I would say that anything under Hiroshima should be considered a tactical nuclear weapon because, you could still level a small community with such a nuclear weapon and cause massive amounts of destruction. Yet, the way it's classified now, anything under 350 kilotons is a tactical nuke, which would be 25 times essentially what Hiroshima was, which seems insane. So anyways, those are the tactical nukes that they're looking for. And this is going to be, of course, very problematic for Russia. And the game that they're playing and what people need to understand, and you'll notice if you go back throughout the last 3 years, in terms of the delivery of weapon systems, you'll notice that the UK will give a bit and they'll be in the crosshairs of the Russians for a while. Then France will give a little bit, they'll be in the crosshairs. Poland will give a little bit, the United States will up the ante. And it's a big game of hot potato, right? Because nobody wants to be holding the hot potato too long, because then the Russians are going to be pointing their nukes squarely at you. The benefit of the heterogeneous NATO enterprise is that for all its shortcomings in terms of interoperability, they have the advantage of keeping the Russians moving their target. So they can be a moving target. So, right now, Germany's on the shit list because they're getting ready to give a nuclear-capable long-range cruise missile platform in the form of the Taurus to the Ukrainians. So the Russians are saying, we're probably going to target your factories where these things are made if you follow through with this. Well, all it's going to take is for someone else to stick their neck out, like maybe France is going to say, okay, it's time to put troops in again, right? And so now that divides Russia's attention between these two belligerents. So this is the strategy, and they've been doing it, and they've been playing it very strategically, and it seems to be working for the most part to keep Russia guessing and to keep these moving crosshairs occupying a lot of their attention. Now, according to a British Army Colonel, Richard Kemp, and I've been saying this for a long time, they're going to give Ukraine nuclear weapons eventually. Ukraine already has the nuclear delivery platform. The more and more they provide these more advanced weapon systems, a lot of these weapon systems double as potential nuclear delivery platforms or are strategic platforms because they're giving more and more advanced platforms at this point in time. They're almost a de facto nuclear power now that they have F-16s alone, which can be, of course, a carrier for NATO nuclear weapons. But this former British Army colonel, and you get a lot of these guys who are former, officers who always seem to toe the party line. He believes, anyways, that if the U.S. pulls back its support, Europe must take full responsibility for Kiev's security, including strategic defense against Russia. It sounds extreme, but such scenarios are now being seriously discussed in the West. The Telegraph reports that France and the U.K. are preparing for a post-Trump era, or one in which Washington is no longer a reliable ally. Again, I think that divide is purely surface level. I think it's beneficial for Trump politically to distinguish himself from the more hardline anti-Russia camp in Europe and the United States. But that doesn't mean that that's the reality in terms of where he's aligned. Sweden wants war in the Baltics. Apparently, they're going to tighten their controls on maritime traffic in the Baltics starting in July. And they're going to be targeting vessels suspected of helping Russia evade sanctions. Russia recently has begun putting escorts in the form of naval ships and airplanes to surveil and basically just protect these shadow fleets in the Baltic. These new rules are going to empower authorities to inspect insurance documents of ships, including those merely passing through Swedish waters, as a part of efforts to expose the opaque ownership and operations of the Russian shadow fleet. Okay? NATO is also on the point of the F-16 being a nuclear delivery platform. They're now going to be connecting these F-16s to NATO military's Wi-Fi. Ministry of Defense signed an agreement on the CRC system interface, which is CSI, is a NATO military control system in Link 16. The signing of the agreement will allow our F-16s, Mirage 2000s, as well as our air defense systems, in particular the Patriot, to coordinate their actions in a single digital system with allied platforms. Meaning that Ukraine is now a de facto NATO state, okay? Now we have the ability to use Swedish ASC-890 aircraft. The range application of F-16s and Mirage 2000s will significantly expand, and our air defense will improve overall. So again, we have the harmonization of Ukrainian defense forces as well as NATO into one unified bloc. Now, with respect to the threats towards China, in the South China Sea, we have the U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth saying that the threat of China conquering Taiwan is real and could be imminent. Now, he later added to that by saying that he didn't think that the attack was going to come, well, it could come any time between now and 2 years from now. This maps on to what I believe James Stavridis, who was a U.S. general as well, is saying about the potential for a war with China or an incursion into the island of Taiwan that, of course, the U.S. would be obliged to interdict. In addition to that, China has responded by saying that the U.S. should not play with fire on Taiwan, almost echoing and mocking Donald Trump's statements towards Vladimir Putin, a testament to the unity, perhaps, of the Russians and the Chinese. China's new military exercises are currently underway. The People's Liberation Army's Southern Theater Command announces a combat readiness exercise in the waters and airspace around Scarborough Shoal, including a strengthening of naval and air forces. Simultaneously, the Chinese Coast Guard has announced increased law enforcement patrols in the areas surrounding Scarborough, which China claims as its territorial waters. And it's important to remember that as we speak, we have U.S. Special Forces in Taiwan training them to fight the Chinese. In terms of the markets, the S&P 500 is now historically expensive on every valuation metric that Bank of America tracks. Can you believe that? We were just looking at the market plummeting on the fear of tariffs, which are still very much in play, because these new threats made by the SecDef are going to ensure that even if there is some sort of deal with the tariffs, there still will be a decoupling. It'll just be more gradual. But every possible metric, from the Shiller PE ratio to the median forward PE ratio, forward consensus PE ratio, ratio after ratio, they're all saying the same thing, that this market is the most overvalued in history. There's a meme circulating about a bunch of girls dancing in costumes, celebrating Bitcoin, very reminiscent of the BitConnect heyday right before it crashed to absolute zero. So I do think the top is in. I mean, I don't see how you cannot think the top is in at this point. There's not much room to run unless we're talking about robots doing all the work. And contrary to what people are claiming, it's going to be a while before that happens. We still have a few years. At least it's now in the conversation as being feasible. Back 10 years ago, when Atlas Robot was running, when Boston Dynamics was the only game in town, there were people, even myself, who said that, oh yeah, you know, the robots are going to take our jobs. It's just a matter of time. But when you look at the complexity of training these devices, virtual dojos or not, it's going to take a minute to actually get these humanoid robots to the point where they're actually functionally useful for something. Now, of course, automation that's just one realm of automation. But in Canada, for example, Trump is now imposing steel tariffs of up to 50%. And a lot of Canadian steel manufacturers are saying that this is an extinction level event. Now, 50% tariff, that's wholesale, of course. I presume that most steel is wholesale, so it's not like a refined product. So you're probably going to see a direct one-to-one translation in terms of the absorption of those costs in the past, passing on to the consumer, whereby in China, you know, when you're dealing with a wholesale cost, I might be off on this, but a 50% tariff doesn't mean a 50% increase in price. Nonetheless, this is likely going to put a lot of Canadian steel manufacturers out of business, or definitely reduce the revenues, which is going to obviously be problematic for our economy, which is already struggling in a bad way. Thankfully, I won't have to, once we get established here anyways, food won't be much of an issue. I have about 12 8x4 raised garden beds with potatoes. I have this greenhouse in here. I'm not sure the exact square footage, but it's a 50 by 25 foot greenhouse. I have a 100 meter by 100 meter orchard with about 50 trees, and it's only half full. So in terms of food, we're getting the chickens coming next week. I got bees coming next week. I'm getting prepared. And I can't imagine how a person could be in this space talking about these things that we talk about and not at least have some degree of preparedness that goes above and beyond the average. Like, I just don't get it. Unless people are taking that fatalistic argument of, I wouldn't want to live in that world anyways, I just don't understand how we know how much our leadership lies, yet a lot of the people in this space seem to think that the government has a plan for when it all goes to hell, and that's going to be sufficient in dealing with your needs. I don't think so. So it's abundantly clear that we continue to careen towards what is likely going to be a massive catastrophe, collapse, crisis scenario. And we should be doing everything in our power at this point in time to try to get prepared for what's about to happen. So that's what's going on today, this fine Saturday, May 31st. Guys, get out there, enjoy the weather. Well, enjoy the smoke in our case, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.